for the Zoom room to fill in. Thank you for joining us for African Proverbs for all ages. All right. Hello again. Good evening. Welcome to P&P Live. Thank you for joining us and tuning in to this virtual format where we continue to bring authors and new books to you. I have the pleasure of hosting our event this evening, and I'm absolutely delighted to welcome our guests, Dr. Johnnetta Betsch Cole and Nelda LaTeef, in conversation with Deborah D. Taylor to celebrate the publication of African Proverbs for all ages. And again, this gorgeous cover. Before we get started, a few housekeeping notes. If you would like to have closed captioning for this event, please look at the bottom of your screen and click on Live Transcript, and then select Show Subtitle. You can adjust the size of the subtitles by clicking Subtitle Settings. You could also click the link we will drop in the chat to get your own copy of African Proverbs for all ages. Lastly, if you have a question for our guest tonight, you can click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and add one there. At the end of the presentation, our guests will have time to answer some of your questions. And you can also upvote these questions that you like and want to have answered. Now on to introductions. Dr. Johnnetta Betsch Cole is an anthropologist and educator with master's and doctorate degrees from Northwestern University. Dr. Cole is the only person to have served as president of both Spelman and Bennett Colleges. She was also the director of the Smithsonian National Museum of African Art from 2009 to 2016. Nelda LaTeef is the award-winning author and illustrator of The Hunter and the Ebony Tree, Animal Village, and The Talking Baobab Tree. She holds a degree in social anthropology from Harvard University and has traveled throughout West Africa conducting field research. Tonight, Deborah D. Taylor will moderate our program. She is a recently retired librarian from the Enoch Pratt Free Library in Baltimore, Maryland. She has chaired and served on many American Library Association committees and on the Award for Lifetime Achievement. She is a reviewer and an adjunct professor teaching young adult literature at the University of Maryland College of Information Studies. And it is now my pleasure to turn the event over to the three of them. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Margaret. It is such a pleasure to be able to talk about this beautiful and timely book as we're moving into the holiday season and we look for ways that we can both entertain and engage young people and families. This is a perfect one to use in for this time. I'd love to ask the two of you, why did you decide to develop this collection? Why did you decide to collaborate? Dr. Cole?
Well, actually, I would love for my dear friend and collaborator to respond, because it was literally Nelda LaTeef who launched this very idea. So Nelda, why don't you talk about that very special visit to the National Museum of African Art?
Well, thank you for that introduction. Actually, it happened because I had just published a book called Animal Village, which was based on African oral tradition, a story. And Dr. Cole was kind enough to write a blurb for the book cover. And I wanted to present her with a copy of the book. So I went and gave her a copy, and over a cup of tea, we discovered that we had a mutual admiration for African proverbs. And it was pure serendipity. And that's how it started. And we both decided that since we both collected African proverbs, we decided that we would pool our proverbs together. And then I would do the illustration and she would do the wonderful a prologue, and it just went from there.
Well, that's perfect segue into the question, because Dr. Cole, in the prologue, you speak of the ability of Proverbs for opening the mind to a whole new way of seeing the world. What did you mean by that? Or can you elaborate on that?
Well, there's so many ways to describe Proverbs, but certainly one for me is to say that these are very short compared with other forms of writing or speaking. These are very short expressions, but they're inevitably catchy. They're engaging. They grab your attention. And so in this world that we live in that is so cluttered with so much, and at this moment, in some ways, so challenged, certainly by a pandemic, by ongoing racial turmoil, by divisiveness, here is a medium called a proverb, specifically out of the continent from which we have all descended, that in an interesting, catchy, and inevitably profound way teaches us. Proverbs dare, in my view, to actually, yes, open our minds to a different way of thinking about something. You know, I was thinking, Sister Librarian, about a proverb that I see rather frequently now at the end of somebody's email. And it says this: if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. You see, I think that proverb has the potential of saying to each of us, you think you're pretty good. You think you're pretty smart. You think you can do lots of things. But have you ever thought about how much more you could do if you would collaborate? So I just think we will never finish doing what in Africa, which Nelda knows so well given her travels throughout the continent, we will never stop doing what in Africa is called a praise song, which is usually done for an individual. We'll never stop doing a praise song for the power, for the cleverness, for the inspiration that we can get from Proverbs.
Oh, and I think, Nelda, what were you going to add?
If I could add that the
please.
idea behind our book is to showcase the common sense wisdom of African proverbs that can be applied to everyday life. There is so much good counsel found in these proverbs. For example, don't tell your important secrets to a friend because a friend has other friends. And there is a great cautionary proverb from Nigeria. If you think you have someone eating out of your hands, it is a good idea to count your fingers. What is distinctive about our book is that it encourages discussion and lively debate as the reader decides which of the 4 proverbs framing each of the 16 illustrations best captures the picture's narrative. We feel the combination of art and proverbs is a wonderful way to make the reader slow down, to take in and own the wisdom that is imparted in each of the proverbs. And in fact, all of my children's picture book stories have been inspired by West African oral tradition. And in those stories, I always try to include proverbs in the dialogues of my characters. For example, in my book, The Talking Baobab Tree, which was inspired by a Wolof tale from Senegal, the story features a wise old baobab tree and a smart and grateful rabbit. In their dialogue upon meeting, the baobab tree, which is known for the tremendous girth of its trunk, tells the rabbit, let me just, I don't like to brag, but it is said, wisdom is like a baobab tree. Can you tell me the reason why? And the rabbit responds, I think I know the answer. Just like no one can put their arms around wisdom, no one can put their arms around you. Well, the actual Proverbs from Senegal, which is included in our book and which I illustrated, is wisdom is like a baobab tree. No one individual can embrace it. And I am going to share the screen with you on that.
Yes.
Well, so I love integrating proverbs in this way into my stories. After the rabbit eats the leaves from the baobab tree, she thanks the tree and says, now even my eyes are full, which is yet another Wolof proverb. And so on. And that is how these proverbs are used as simple part and parcel of everyday conversations.
One of the things that comes across as you read through the book, it seems that Proverbs can serve to unite communities around common values because they, as you say, such common sense, wisdom. And Dr. Cole, you mentioned the whole idea of the divisiveness at this time, but what they do is that they do give a common idea, a common value for communities to unite around.
I think that's very true. And I was going through our book for the 100th and some odd time, because it really is so engaging. And Nelda LaTeef's artistry is it's breathtaking.
Beautiful.
It's breathtakingly beautiful and wonderful. And so just this afternoon, as I was going through the book and celebrating that yesterday we reached a milestone, Nelda, it literally launched on the last day of November. I found myself just pausing and thinking a lot as I read the proverb that says, now I often use a different version, so let me make sure I do it as it's in the book. Until the lion, and because I am a feminist, I would add, and the lioness. So, until the lion and the lioness has his and her own story, the hunter will always have the best stories. That has such profound meaning for me during this time that we're in, because it matters if we can listen to each other's stories.
Mm-hmm.
If we don't assume that the experiences that we have had are the only experiences, and how dare it happen that some will say they are the superior experiences. And so here we are in the 21st century, still lifting up, if we have the wisdom to do so, lessons that are really as old, I would like to think, as humankind. Because if indeed we as humankind, if we go back far enough, each of us has come from that continent, there's no reason for us to assume that Proverbs did not begin way back when humankind also began.
You know, the retired librarian in me was delighted to see the countries of origin attributed in the back matter of the book. Why was this important to include?
Nelda, why don't you speak to that? And I'll be happy to as well.
Well, we also included a map of Africa because this was a golden opportunity to make sure that the reader is fully aware that Africa is not a country, but a huge continent, the second largest, and made up of 54 countries with over 600 spoken languages and many, many different cultures. The only reason we did not put the country of origin next to each proverb at the outset was because about a third of the proverbs do not have a specific country of origin, since many originated from African ethnic groups that live across the borders of several countries because of the random way these countries were divided by the European powers during the time of colonization. It would have been also unnecessary to credit a proverb to Africa when the book is about African proverbs. And so this was an editorial and design decision, allowing us to make sure that the fonts at the top of the pages for the proverbs were as large as possible for every spread.
And I think that it also encourages children to learn more about the countries, those individual countries where the proverbs, you know, came from, where possible.
And I was just going to say, excuse me for interrupting, but I was going to say that all that Nelda just said compared with what you just said can be summed up for me with a single word. It's really about respect. You know, it's about respect. And if I can use an example outside of our book, and indeed the part of the world that the book is centered in, you know, we will sometimes just act in conversations and even more in our interactions with each other that, oh, it doesn't matter. I mean, what's the difference if the person is from El Salvador or Argentina or Uruguay? Or what does it matter? You know, I mean, it's all that part of the world. But it's not just all that part of the world. And Africa, just like that part of the world, is so extraordinarily complex and diverse. And so it was early on when Nelda and I began this expression of our love affair with Proverbs that we said, whenever we can, we will be specific. Yes, out of respect, and certainly in an interest of teaching and inspiring young people and those of us not so young, that we will be as knowledgeable as possible about the specific people. And we wanted to do people, but at least we could do country from which we know this proverb has come.
Now, I have a couple of questions about your art because it's just beautiful and it's so inviting and it works so well with the brevity of each proverb. How did you achieve that effect? What was your process like to get to that effect?
Well, thank you for that lovely compliment. I have to say, this project was an exhilarating challenge because unlike illustrating a 40-page story, each illustration in this book stands as a tub on its own bottom. It represents a story completely independent from the next. And I had the thrill of working with Dr. Cole, an extraordinary collaborator, the recipient of over 70 honorary degrees. Dr. Cole also happens to be one of the most gracious, as I'm sure you've just found out, and humblest people I have ever had the pleasure of knowing. Johnnetta is an absolute force of nature, and just knowing her makes you a better person. As a collaborator, she brought to this endeavor her passion for African proverbs, her interpretive skills and academic rigor, and her inimitable ebullience, which made every meeting rich and exhilarating. I truly don't know anyone who uses African proverbs so effectively in her conversation. Johnnetta is a born teacher, and she is truly the living embodiment of one of her favorite proverbs, which is, "She who learns must teach, and she who teaches must learn." The common thread running through this project was the massive continent of Africa and the 54 countries encompassing it. I began by putting up on my studio wall 2 rows with 8 frames in each row. At this stage, my nephew calls this wall, quite correctly, my wall of high expectations. In the center of each empty frame, I taped the proverb that I was considering illustrating, and those proverbs kept changing as we considered new proverbs. Once the illustration was done, I would place it into the frame, and always before beginning the next illustration, I would study the illustrations on the wall and decide what colors and perspectives to use next to keep the page turn fresh and exciting. And it was always such a thrill to see black empty frames steadily be replaced with colorful imagery. I would say a great deal of my knowledge and ideas of how to visually narrate the proverbs came from the many years I spent as the daughter of a US Foreign Service family, living in the northern African country of Tunisia and the West African countries of Niger, Nigeria, and Senegal, and then returning to West Africa on a grant from Harvard to pursue field research. This background gave me a pretty broad frame of reference to draw upon and confidence in my instincts and choices as an artist. And I approached each proverb with the intent of leaving a visual imprint in the reader's mind. My process was intuitive. I drew upon my memories of the many years I spent in Africa, channeling my recollections of the vastness of the landscape, the expanse of the sky, the colors of the earth and vegetation. I wanted to give the reader an authentic feel for the African continent. And I drew upon not only my sense of place, but on my empathy and admiration for the peoples and the diverse cultures of Africa. I chose acrylic paint for its warm, vibrant, bold colors. And because it is fast drying, I am always impatient to see my vision unfold. I chose the medium of collage for the depth and texture it adds, yes, as well as its crisp, clean, layered look. Once all the elements are done and I begin to arrange and glue the layers, it is at this stage that the proverb comes to life. It is also at this stage that I'm almost always awed by the unexpected magic of collage, as layer upon layer is positioned. I hope that answers the question.
Well, you know, and I think it really does kind of come across. You get a sense of vibrancy from the colors and from the layout. And I think that's why it works so well. And Dr. Cole, and you talked about the brevity and how you're able to get so much across in such a short few words. Married with those pictures, you really get such a strong and urgent almost feel for the power of the words and what it could mean in someone's life. And we think about it in terms of a book for children, but as you say on the cover, is for all ages. What do you hope adults come away with when they share this with young people, or if they pick it up on their own?
Well, I think we do hope in many ways that age ceases to be a determinant.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's one expression that we will often use. We'll say, well, that's sort of the child inside of me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an everyday way of saying, you know, I may be of this age, and for me, that's a whole lot of times around the sun. But it says, but there's sort of something inside of me that is still so connected to being childlike, mm-hmm. which of course we mean by that inquisitive,
yes,
and full of adventuresomeness and playful. I know an expression that will often be used in the African American community about a child who is really very wise. just seems to know more than you think that child would know for his or her age. And we say, she's been here before.
Here before.
She's been here before. And so, yes, Nelda and I wanted age not to be the factor that determines, would you love this book? Would you fall in love with what you learned in this book? And so we want folk of all ages to be instructed by what they read, certainly to be inspired by what they read. We would hope that individuals of any age who have never spent a lot of time with Proverbs would see how much fun Proverbs can be. And I really want to emphasize that word, just fun, learning in a way that is fun. A proverb that says, if you think one creature cannot make a difference, you've never spent a night in a closed room with a mosquito. I mean, that's fun. But it's fun that's centered in such a message. Because that message says, each and every one of us can, in quotes, make some difference in this world. So for all ages has a lot of meaning for my sister Nelda LaTeef and for me. And I also want to just sneak in, Sister Librarian, because we haven't done it yet, how exceptionally fortunate we are that this book, that this African Proverbs for all ages is the very first children's book to ever carry the seal of Oprah Winfrey.
Yes, yes. Speak about that for a second, because I just saw that it does have the Oprah stamp of approval. And I think that's a very important thing to make note of. I'm glad you reminded us, because I think that's very important. Because we associate Oprah with the sharing and with people kind of digging a little deeper into their all sides of who they are. And tell us what that means for this book.
Well, the first thing I'm going to say is it's really because of Nelda, who just would not stop asking me to reach out to the phenomenal Sister Oprah Winfrey to ask if she would consider reading our book. And I must tell you, when Nelda LaTeef gets on something, she doesn't get off, all right? I mean, you don't get to be an award-winning illustrator of children's books and to have this kind of literary excellence as a part of who she is without having determination. And so I finally gave in, tell you the truth, because I wanted to get Nelda off my case. But in such a gracious and generous way, Miss Winfrey said, yes, this is a book. This is a book that I respect and that I endorse.
Well, that is really great news. And Nelda, what were you going to add to that?
I just want to say, as my esteemed friend and collaborator, Dr. Johnnetta Cole said, we are beyond grateful and absolutely humbled by Oprah Winfrey designating African Proverbs for All Ages her first children's Oprah book, and for having been the driving force behind its publication by Roaring Brook Press and Macmillan. And we are thrilled the book has been named a Junior Library Guild Gold Standard selection.
Well, I think it's going to be a wonderful gift in this gift giving season. So I think it's perfect. It's very timely for those reasons. And we have a few questions from our listeners and viewers. But I'd be speaking of fun. I just could not have this opportunity without bringing up a couple of the proverbs that I thought were really stood out to me, and to get your thoughts on what those proverbs mean to you. The first one being, and I can tell that both of you responded to this one: traveling leaves you speechless and then turns you into a storyteller. That just resonated with me. What did it mean to both of you?
Nelda?
Well, this
because it sounds like the book.
I'm going to share the illustration for that one.
Okay.
Do you have it? Okay. Okay. Did you see? Did the illustration come up?
Yep.
Terrific. Well, this proverb particularly resonates with me. Traveling personally gave me a broad frame of reference and influenced me to become a children's author and illustrator. When I was growing up, my parents were with the U.S. Foreign Service, so we did a lot of traveling. I believe, just like reading, traveling opens your eyes to so many different worlds and gives you an appreciation for different cultures, languages, customs, foods, art forms. It makes you realize, even at a young age, that there is not just one world, your world, but so many different worlds out there. When I was in Niger, for example, I would drive with my Nigerian friends into the bush, just about 45 minutes outside the capital, Niamey, to see my favorite animals, the giraffes grazing in the wild. And on the return drive, we would stop and visit a Zarma village where the grandfather of one of my friends lived. And there was a woman with snow white hair who was often seated on a straw mat under the shade of a large acacia tree, selling chiclets. As it turned out, she was the village griot, which in West African culture is a keeper of traditional knowledge. In fact, it is said when a griot dies, it is as though a library has been burned to the ground because so much knowledge is destroyed. And we would buy chiclets, and soon children and a few adults would gather, and she would tell us stories. And as she told the stories, she would make unusual sounds to bring her stories to life. She could mimic all kinds of animals. She could growl and screech and howl like the wind. And it was only on the way back to Niamey that my friends, who were native Zarma speakers, would translate into French, our mutual common language, the stories we had just heard. I would do some sketching, and I would jot down notes about the stories that I found appealing. And it was those stories that inspired me to become a children's author and illustrator.
Oh, that's a great story. Well, we have a number of questions from our viewers and listeners, so I'm going to make sure that we bring them in on the festivities. And I'm going to take a question from Jane Myers, who asked, there are so many proverbs from throughout Africa. How did you select the ones to include in the book? Were they ones that were more accessible to young people? Were those the ones that you especially considered?
It was a complicated process that I would say did not end until it was almost ready to send the book off to Macmillan Publishers, to Roaring Books, the children's division. Because in some ways, I think of this book like a quilt. I mean, there were pieces that had to go together. All of the ways in which Nelda is just an unusually gifted artist, but it had to be her artistry in cahoots, if I can use that word, with the Proverbs themselves. And because we wanted to make this a truly enjoyable but teaching book, we had to not just choose Proverbs, but choose 4 Proverbs that would work with a given illustration so that we could do one of the things that I think is incredibly unique and wonderful about this book. And that is to invite our readers to look at the 4 Proverbs and decide from their perspective which one best matches the illustration. So it was a complicated process that went on and on almost to the very end. And I can say publicly, I hope this isn't the last time that Nelda LaTeef and I go through this long, complicated process that seems not to end until it's time to send the manuscript off. It's
Here.
fun. It has been wonderful.
Here.
We have a question from Sienna, who is age 9, and she wants to know if you have a favorite proverb.
May I respond by asking, how old is Sienna? Is she
Sienna
9?
She's 9 years old.
Could Sienna be my, as we would say in the African American community, my play niece? Could that be Sienna Lott, who wants to know her auntie's favorite proverb?
She doesn't give, yes, she says yes.
All right. Well, Nelda, I'm going to let you go first, and then I'll answer. In the entire book, what's your favorite? Oh, this is a tough question, Sienna.
Well, I'm going to go ahead while you're thinking and share mine. Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay. So Sienna, mine over here this is the illustration that I did, and it's called, let me just get it over there. It is only once you have carried your own water will you learn the value of every drop. And that's a Namibian proverb. And this proverb brings back a lot of memories of seeing women and children carrying heavy bucket loads of water and walking under a scorching sun over long distances of barren land. This, unfortunately, is a common sight in the African countryside. Often women are also carrying babies on their back. So in my illustration of the proverb, my intent was to capture the strength, determination, and the beauty and fortitude of these women and children. I included a young girl in the foreground, glancing over her shoulder at us with a glance as if to say, only once you have carried your own water will you learn the value of every drop. And this picture reminds us what a luxury it is to have clean running water when fully a third of the world's population lacks access to safe water, unfortunately.
Well, since my niece Sienna has put this tough question, I'm going to have to struggle to respond. And I'm going to say, of all the proverbs, I find the one that just continues to move me so deeply is this. It always seems impossible until it is done.
Mm-hmm.
And Sienna, you know that I do a lot of speechifying, giving talks like your mom does. And I was using those words And I continue to attribute those words to President Nelson Mandela. When I discovered that it was also an African proverb, it had even more meaning for me. And I think that whether you are 9 years old, like Sienna, or you just had a milestone 81st birthday, which I had, going through life, it's always about getting something done. And sometimes it can seem so impossible. Like, right now, will we get through this pandemic? It seems impossible until it is done. And so I find that proverb as a source of great strength and hope.
We have a question.
Can I just say one more thing?
Sure, please do.
And it's by no accident that that proverb happens to be the last proverb in our book.
That's the one to remember, right?
That's the one because it always seems impossible until it is done. So.
Well, we have a comment and also a question from Loretta Gray, who asks, since proverbs are rich in meaning, would you say they can be used to teach character building among children and teaching English at the same time, so that it would be for new English language learners as well?
Johnnetta,
these are terrific questions. And forgive me, but I have a dear colleague who is a Loretta Gray. So I'm gonna just make you my colleague right now, even if you're not the Loretta Gray I know. Yes, of all the things that we could say about Proverbs, and there are just so many, that they instruct, that they inspire, that they lift you up, that they make you laugh. But certainly one could say that they build character. Yes. Mm-hmm. They build character. And indeed, in the African settings of those 54 countries that are on the continent, when proverbs are used, especially when an elder will use a proverb in the presence of a child, the intent is to build character. The intent is to say, this is a lesson that you can learn and that will, in fact, make you a kinder, a more productive person. So yes.
Jane Myers wants to know, is there any way that there will be signed copies available at all? Are you all, I know the pandemic has really put a damper on the ability to host signings and what have you, but, and she says that they have a proverb section in their libraries because there's such an important genre in Africa, Lubutu libraries in Zambia. So I don't know if there are any ways to get inscribed copies at all.
Well, Sister Librarian, it always seems impossible until it is done. And my wonderful collaborator, Nelda, and I are working on, could we possibly do something like this? For example, we're working now on an event here where I live in the northern part of Florida that would actually involve my signing and maybe shipping a bunch of books first to Nelda, and then they come back to the bookstore in my neck of the woods, and they're signed. So just ask. You never know. It may seem impossible until it's done.
It's interesting that Zambia is mentioned over here, because just last week I was invited on a Zoom meeting to the American International School of Zambia to speak about one of my other books. So what a small world.
Well, Kathleen points out that this looks like, and I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, the Jenne Mosque or the Janine Mosque. I'm not the Jean Mosque, I think it is. It's DJ.
Yes, I was inspired by that, as well as a couple of other structures. And so I sort of combined the architecture in Timbuktu is fascinating. And I just love the fact that the streets are all covered in sand. And I thought that the contrast between the sand and the blue sky would be interesting. I think I showed that. I actually have it over here.
That would be great if you could show that.
I'm going to share it.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
You know, I'm just sitting here thinking as Nelda shares this extraordinary work.
And
so much that can be learned from every single page of this book.
Mm-hmm.
And imagine now that perhaps a grandma or an auntie or an uncle or a grandpa, a mom, a dad, a sibling is going through this book with a younger child. And that child says, well, where is this? And it triggers the person to say, let me kind of find out, and looks and decides, you know, this could probably be a mosque in Timbuktu. And I would like to think then when that happens, the person who is with this youngster will say, you know, when I was growing up, we had an expression that said, oh, that's way the heck and gone. It's like way over there in Timbuktu, as if that was the end of the earth where nothing was happening. Nobody would want to go there. But imagine looking at that image that comes from the depths of Nelda's creativity. And this person with the youngster says, you know, Timbuktu, that's where the first university was ever started. It's like that with each page of this book. And so we just hope that, you know, you take a quick run through just for the joy of seeing each page. But we just hope that every reader will almost just ring out of this experience things that even Nelda and I were not thinking about.
Well, one of the participants who does happen to be your colleague, Loretta Gray, she said in the comment, and she said the very thing, how it could trigger conversation between adults and children or whoever is sharing this book. And you just described it perfectly. The way she asked her question, you just gave the perfect explanation for how this book could be used. It's a wonderful book to sit on a lap and with young people and to think about places that they may never have considered.
A big virtual hug to my NCNW sister, Loretta Gray.
Well, before I let you go, I'm struck by one proverb that says, in the moment of crisis, the wise build bridges and the foolish build dams. And certainly this book is all about those bridges. And you have done a wonderful job in your collaboration to help move us toward building bridges rather than building dams. And so I want to thank you for your thoughtfulness. Thank you for your wonderful collaboration. I can't wait to share it with lots of folks during this holiday season, and wishing you so much joy from having done this work and being in touch with many people who will feel the same way our viewers and listeners did tonight.
Thank you.
Yes, I echo everything that Deb said. And Deb, thank you for your wonderful facilitating of the conversation. And again, thanks to Nelda and Johnnetta for joining us this evening, and congratulations on the publication of African Proverbs. It is quite magnificent. So everyone, don't forget, you can still click the link in the chat box to get your copy of the book. As an independent bookstore, we really do appreciate your support. Please feel free to check our events calendar found on the Politics and Prose website to join us for other events like this one. And then I think that's kind of a wrap on the evening. I hope everyone enjoys the rest of the evening. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Take
Thank
care.
you so much.